Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The mayor has called the council meeting to order. Vice Mayor Kaplan.
Here.
Councilmember De La Cruz.
Here.
Councilmember Gross. Mayor
I'm
Lindsay.
here somewhere.
Here. Councilmember McCormick.
Here.
Councilmember Moss.
Here.
And Councilmember Petros.
Here.
We do have a quorum. I apologize. Rabbi Caroline will not be able to join us this evening. If we may please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next item, Mayor's brief comments by council.
Would anyone like to make a comment?
I made a mistake in my personal scheduling, thinking that our executive session was tonight. I'm going to have short time tomorrow night. I think that questions may come up tomorrow night as to what those of us that were on council at the time, the circumstances arose that are the subject of tomorrow night's executive session, what we might have remembered about intent and effects, and I think what I will do is find a way to communicate those thoughts to the clerk, just in case my abbreviated participation will result in my inability to fully contribute to that question.
Just make sure, remember that it is an executive session. It is not public record until after litigation is over.
Right.
Thank you. We'll make it work. Yes.
Today was a king tide at 9:40 this morning,
Yes.
and our manager
Please put your volume, your sound. Thank you.
and our manager took it upon himself to go around our community and look at the different areas that would be affected by the king tide, and which I thought was a wonderful initiative, I've got some ideas about some things that I've spoken to her about and I've spoken to Jake about, and I think we'll bring it up in the next meeting with regards to the outflow preventers and such. But I think we need to do a little testing to find out whether they are actually working or not, and we'll bring it back the next meeting. I just
Great.
want to know
Thank you.
I can tell you, Jose, I was going by the school, the drain by the school, and Jose Lopez was out there Sunday morning taking pictures.
Yeah.
And there was water, standing water in
Right.
that drain.
Yes.
At that time.
Where was that drain?
The one right as you come off of, what is it, West McIntyre? And you
Is that
take the left, that drain right there on the right.
Is that the one that we're going to be?
I'm sorry, which one was it?
As you go down West McIntyre and you dead end into the school and you have to take a left.
Yes,
That drain.
that's the worst one. That was where we had 4 inches.
And that's the one we're going to be
that-
first working on.
Correct. So the council funded the pump station at the K8, and it will exactly resolve that issue.
So
So
we are
we're
on it.
point.
We're on it.
We're on
Great.
point.
I think Heather and, gosh, is it Warren?
So
Allendale.
Allendale and Heather is also,
235, 238 Heather around Councilmember Moss's project. That is another low point that we checked out. It was percolating, it was bubbling a little bit, but not above the grade line. And then we had 1 or 2 other spots where we had 2 inches and one where we had 3 inches. And I will say that you could tell that the structures were well designed because the water that was accumulating was sort of right in a symmetrical circle around the structure. So
I delighted. I'm glad we're working on this. I want to remind everyone that 20 years ago, there would have been a foot of standing water. So baby steps. We need to be more aggressive, but we are on our way.
and there might have been disco music.
And there might have been disco music as well. Different kind, maybe Madonna, not disco.
Yeah.
Different
So things have improved.
things have improved. Great. Next item, please.
Agenda approval, deferrals, additions, deletions, substitutions, withdrawals.
Mayor?
Madam Manager.
I'm sorry, yes, there is one ordinance on second reading, item 8A2. that I would like to withdraw a date certain, depending on when the next meeting is scheduled, either for the November or the December meeting.
Are we deferring the second reading, or are we pulling it all together?
I think I think we can defer second reading. Tomorrow I'll be meeting with the chair of the committee as well as some staff members and other stakeholders, and I think we should be able to resolve the open issues. If not by the next, I guess it depends on when the November meeting will fall, but I think either by the November or the December meeting.
Mayor, if I may, given that change, may I pull out of order 10C1 to be heard at the time of A2? I just have to read the title, and then that way we can determine the date, and I can announce the date certain for the second reading.
Sure.
Wait, I just want to make a
Yes.
quick change
Yes.
on 10A3. Instead of report from Kimley Horn, it would just be an update on utilities.
Perfect. And actually, since we are wanting to be as precise as possible, let's change the title of discussion item 10A2 from date for Pocket Park Charrette to date for Parks Master Plan Charrette.
And one other thing I wanted to add, 10A4 and 5 are very similar. I think we could probably combine those together
I was going to mention
if you're okay
that
with that.
I am.
All right, so we can combine those together.
Move.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next item, public comments.
Absolutely. Welcome, everyone. It's good to see a big crowd today. Our first speaker is Yvette Fernandez. Welcome. Please come to the podium and give us your name and address, and then your discussion item.
Yvette Fernandez, 575 Crandon Boulevard. And Laudi Ibarra, 482 Fernwood Road. Okay, first we would like to thank the mayor and the council members for their time, hard work, and dedication that you give to make the village of Key Biscayne a better place for all of us. First, in regards to the entry block, we ask that you please continue to consider purchasing the entry block. The village has lost a lot of great opportunities in the past, and we think this is one of those great opportunities. It has a potential to be so many things like much-needed green space or a library. We also have some suggestions to make some of the current parks on Key Biscayne more inviting and appealing to families, which we would say is the largest population at this time in Key Biscayne. For example, the Village Green, there's a lot going on, and there's not many shaded areas. During Hurricane Irma, we did lose some big trees, and I feel like putting a shaded area in each of the fields doesn't have to be that big, but something where we can move bleachers in and out of, or maybe for like Winterfest or whatever things we have going on, that we can use that shaded area.
Okay. Our current skate park, the company who currently rents out the pump tracks to the village has a different skate park options, which the village can rent for the same price. I would like you to consider switching out the current pump tracks to the other options. With a weather starting to get better, it is a great place for kids and teenagers to be active and meet up with friends. The park with hills next to the beach park has boulders, which are great for climbing and jumping. Adding a slides to one of the hills will make the park more inviting for families to enjoy.
The beach park also has an amazing location and is used by many residents. We would suggest a few things there. Maybe adding play cubes between the shower area and the fenced area. This area is already shaded by palm trees, and it will give the kids something appropriate to climb on. We would also like you to consider changing the fountain in the beach park to an interactive splash area with climbing and sliding options. We know this is a more costly project, therefore we would like you to consider it for the future. Many cities have interactive splash areas and or pools, and we have a sad splash area that is usually clogged because of debris from the large trees surrounding it. This summer, between the seaweed and the bacteria swimming in the ocean was not an option. Therefore, we need something to cool off in the hot summer. Also, on a side note, we believe that as a village, we really need to support the Miami water keepers in helping to solve the bacteria and the sewage issues that we have right now in our oceans.
And our last suggestion for the beach park is a community sharing paddle boards. How awesome would it be if we could have a concept similar to Lime Bikes, but for paddle boards? We would like you to consider placing 4 to 6 community sharing paddle boards at the beach park or Oceana Beach Access Path. Luckily, some Key Biscayne's residents have created the company called Path. With this concept in mind, we would like you to consider a pilot program at no cost to the village to give residents in non-waterfront condos and homes to access to rent paddle boards on an hourly rate and possibly create paddleboard storage at a monthly fee for those residents who already have paddleboards.
Did you say 4 to 6 or 46?
4 to 6.
Okay.
But if you want
Want to make
46,
sure.
We'll take that too.
Please, through the clerk, please. Thank you. No, that's okay. She's the keeper of all our stuff. You guys, thank you very much. Wonderful presentation. Thank you. And our next speaker is Allison Owen. Welcome, Ms. Owen.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
I'm Allison Owen. I'm a volunteer at the Library Garden. I have been there for more than 10 years. I hear, discussions of pocket parks, the Village Green, and so on, and yet the Library Garden is totally neglected. Now, last night I was at the meeting where some of the candidates were, and they suggested I come here and talk to you tonight. That's why I'm here. But due to an arrangement with the county, the village is responsible for the upkeep of the Library Garden. And here it is, this beautiful place, and it doesn't receive the attention of the council. You never hear anybody talking about that. You talk about spending, hundreds of thousands on that little space in front of where the gas station used to be, in front of the community center. You talk about the beach park, the pocket parks, and here you have a sinkhole, a live water pond. You have birds, you have fish, you have trees that don't appear anywhere else except in Fairchild Tropical Garden, and it's never mentioned because you don't own the land, but you are responsible for it, and it should be a show piece for the village. It's a beautiful spot. I mentioned it to the new people here. Probably you've never been there. I'm sure the Public Works Director's never been there. I don't know how many of you have been there. When I mentioned it to the council members last night, there was very little. It's not on your radar. And you talk about master plans. You talk about green space. This is a beautiful green space. It is totally. Yes. The lawn gets mowed every so often. Maybe there's a little infusion of something, but it needs a major, major contribution from all of you. Since Irma last fall, there's trees dead, there's plants destroyed, there's the irrigation system doesn't work. Come on, this is something important for you, and I beg you.
It's now on our radar.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And our last speaker, and if anyone else would like to sign up, now is your opportunity, but the last person who has signed up is Khalil? Corey.
Hi, how are you, everyone? My name's,
My name and address.
Hi, Council. My name is Andres Abello. This is Khalil Kuri and Felipe Jauregui. We're all the founders of Paddle. That was briefly mentioned.
Your home address, please.
Oh, sorry. My home address is 338 West McIntyre Street.
Please.
So just to give you a little bit of intro about what Paddle is. So about 2 years ago, we saw the concept of Lime Bike coming to the Key and being lifelong avid water sportsmen. And we've been fishing and boating, paddleboarding, doing all kinds of activities on the water. We saw an innovative space to be able to bring the same technology that we see in Lime Bike and other bike share concepts into paddleboards. Eventually we refined the concept and we were able to come up with a product that was safe, that works, and it'd be a great addition to be able to bring onto our island. I mean, where we grew up, we just see tremendous opportunity for it here. Anything like that?
I think that's
The way that paddle would really add value to Key Biscayne is,
You
right
gotta
now, we see
speak into the mic.
the way paddle would really add value to Key Biscayne is most of you, if any of you own a paddleboard, the hardest part is lugging it to the beach. This would, as a health benefit, would bring more people to, go to the beach, do an activity on the water safely and, enjoy the time on the water with their family and friends. We already see it with a local club called Chico's Paddle Club. And their hardest thing is finding paddleboards sometimes to be able to, have more people go on the club because everybody loves it. He always picks great days. I think this would be an added benefit to that and, any other time they would go paddleboarding. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you all.
Cool idea.
Yep.
Thank you.
you guys already. I guess you guys have the flyers
Yeah.
there. So
Yep, we have
there's
it.
also in it you would log into it through your web app, similar to the Lime Bike concept. So it's fairly simple program, and we'll be able to track how many users are using it, what time they're using it.
Yeah, we get all the customer analytics data, which we'll be able to provide that with the city in terms of financial information as well for tax purposes and whatnot. That's all built in. So I mean, all the technicalities are discussed and have been thought of, but we'd like to discuss this further in the future.
Okay, thank you very
Thank you.
much.
Thank
Can
you.
I ask you guys a question?
Yes,
Do
of course.
are we your first stop, or are you somewhere else already?
So currently, we would like to first launch the pilot program here in Key Biscayne. And
Thank you for bringing it to us first.
no, this is our home.
Where are the oars? I see the paddles, but I don't see the oars.
The oars are behind, in between the racking system and the boards.
So it's a dual locking system. Once you unlock it with your phone,
You get them both?
you get the board and the paddle comes off. To return it, you need to return both.
Okay.
We'd like to be first.
We like to provide it first here.
Thank you
you.
all. And our last speaker is Michael Davey.
Can't help myself. Mike Davey, 50 Ocean Lane Drive. Really just one item. I mean, I'm going to listen to quite a bit tonight, but in speaking to Councilmember Moss, he had discussed the 2040 vision plan. And I just want to remind you all that the original 2020 vision plan had a committee of 23 people. Our purpose as a council is to represent the individuals who provide us with the vision. We then enact that vision and then give it to the manager to get things done. In speaking to Councilmember Moss, I was a little concerned that he said that you're not going to have a committee, that the council should be doing this with focus groups. I would recommend strongly that if you're going to move forward with this, you have a committee of individuals in this community who take charge and take ownership, and then we need more than just 7 people weighing in on this. This is a big issue. To update the 2020 vision plan, we need a lot more thought. I mean, you all have great ideas, but this village is full of people with great ideas, and I think we need to include them in these processes. So that's really the only thing I want to talk about. I highly recommend that we have a committee formed for the 2040 vision. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm closing public comments. Thank everyone for coming. And now, Madam Clerk, next.
Next item is the consent agenda.
Move.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
And our next item?
Next item is an ordinance on second reading, an ordinance of the Village Council of the Village of Key Biscayne, Florida, amending the village code by amending Chapter 23 Retirements, Section 23-35 Contributions, to provide that the plan will continue to meet statutory minimum benefits and standards, providing for severability, providing for conflicts, providing for inclusion in the code, and providing for an effective date.
Move.
Second.
Thank you.
I don't see that our attorney's here yet. He must have gotten caught in traffic. Madam Manager, do you feel comfortable? I know that this is not your item, but if you could just give us a very brief introduction to where we are and why this is an ordinance and what our next steps are. And I think it's self-explanatory, but for the sake of everyone here and our residents watching, I think it's nice to put it in context.
And we'll need a public hearing.
Yes, we will.
So essentially, this ordinance on second reading amends the village's ordinance regarding the village contributions to the fire and police pension program. Specifically, the added language basically ties our floor to Florida statute. I can read it. Notwithstanding the foregoing, any prospective reductions in the system's multiplier shall not cause any member's benefits to drop below the minimum benefits described in chapters 175 and 185 of Florida statute. So that is the only change to the ordinance, and it is exactly as it was presented on first reading.
And this was done based on the recommendations of the State Pension Board for us to be compliant. So we are just following their recommendations to be compliant. With that, let me open public comments on this ordinance. Anyone who would like to speak to this item? Thank you all. I will be closing public comments. Discussion, do we want to have a brief discussion, please?
One of the things that we discussed on the first reading was the fact that currently, I mean, I don't know if we want to put this in here, but it's currently 2%. And for the sake of people knowing what it is, I don't know if that number should be sitting in here, because we're grandfathered in at a lower rate than what is the current state minimum. But we have a grandfather unless we reduce benefits, then we go up to 2.75.
I think, and we did discuss it, I think that's a very good point, and we should be incorporating it. So,
I mean, even if it just says in parentheses, currently 2.0 or something, so that we know where we're at the point that we are adopting this.
do we want to put it in the fourth whereas clause? The division has requested that the village amend its pension ordinance to include language ensuring that the statutory minimum benefits of 2%.
Currently 2%. I mean, it could be something else in the future. We're not locked in.
But it's if the thought is worthy, it should be in the recitals.
Okay. Yep.
1, 2, 3. That, I think the fourth whereas is sensible.
Okay.
So.
Well, shy of our attorneys being here, I just texted to see if I can buzz them in to see if they have any issue. I have no issue, but I'm not sure what the legal implications may be.
Can we table it and just bring it back when they're here?
Yes.
I believe Steve's on his way, so that might.
Can I make a motion to table it?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. If I may,
Yes.
Village Clerk's report, request to reschedule November 13th, regular council meeting due to swearing-in ceremony on November 15th, 2018. And if I may propose possibly moving the scheduled regular council meeting for October 23rd to either October 30th, which is a Tuesday, the following Tuesday, or November 5th, which is a Monday, which is a day before Election Day.
The 30th, I think, is more appropriate.
And canceling the meeting of November 13th, which is for the new sitting.
You have it, when is your second meeting, or when is, you don't have a second meeting in November, you have only one?
Only one due to Thanksgiving. correct?
Madam Manager, are you going to need one meeting in November?
We will need a meeting to adopt the carry forward amendment, and it's an ordinance that I understand requires 2 readings. So we could do the first reading on the 30th, and then we could perhaps call a special call for second reading if need be.
So can we tentatively schedule a meeting before Thanksgiving? I mean, this is up to you guys. I may not even watch on TV because it's so close to Thanksgiving.
I can get in contact with the new members of council and try to coordinate a date.
I will make popcorn. So the Tuesday before Thanksgiving, are you guys willing to do that? No, you're not here. How about?
I'm not going to be here either. Assuming I'm here.
Was that prophetic? No. The last Tuesday of the month?
The 27th.
The 27th? It's up to you all. I'm just trying to facilitate the carryover ordinance.
And when's our December meeting?
The 4th,
And you only have one in December.
correct.
Maybe we should put the December, well, yeah, I hate moving these things. We're gonna have one back to a week and then another one the next week.
The 27th, and then you can
Would
do,
would we really need 2 meetings? I mean,
To adopt the ordinance, I believe it requires 2 readings, correct?
So maybe it
Yes.
could just be a special meeting to adopt the
We could
ordinance.
do that. Why don't we just do that? And work around everybody's calendars.
I think the new council would like to have
A say, probably.
a meeting, just,
Well, we could do the 27th.
okay,
And
okay.
then we will find out, once we get through that meeting, when we want to establish the special meeting, which would be a short meeting anyway, based on who's here and what everybody's calendar is. Would that
What's the
work?
thought behind the first council meeting of the new council? Why cancel that?
I'm sorry, repeat that?
I think one of your suggestions was to cancel the first meeting or the only meeting in November.
Correct. In case that there's an issue, I can't have a council meeting in between the installation ceremony and election day.
No, that's right.
So that's
It
the,
has to be-
That's the
wrinkle.
reason.
That's the wrinkle.
So this installation is the 15th?
15th, and the meeting is scheduled for the 13th.
No, that doesn't work.
Correct.
Right.
That's what she's bringing to her attention. So then the only possible option, because of everyone's calendars and the holiday, would be November 27th.
I won't be here.
No, you won't be here, but that's okay, isn't it?
And you won't be
I
here.
forgot. My,
I won't be here either,
Asian, man,
Frank.
you can
There's
do whatever you
nothing
want,
more
Frank.
irrelevant.
He's not going
than
away.
I have to rethink these things.
So, yes.
Forget my whereabouts are completely irrelevant.
So to clarify, I can move the meeting of October 23rd for this sitting council to October 30th.
Correct.
And what I can do is circulate, I think it would be right to circulate the date with the new council members to see if they're available November 27th.
so I guess I'm missing something. Why are we moving the 23rd to the 30th? What's the thinking behind that?
I'll let the manager speak to that, but to
Oh, okay.
allow a little bit more time for
We need a little more time for the carryover,
budget amendment.
the carry forward amendment.
Okay, all right, got it.
And,
Okay.
and so that's, it's,
Understood.
okay,
I forgot I had discussed it with you.
yes, good. So then, I move to, do we have the motion on the floor?
I think I can have the consensus.
Okay, do you need just consensus?
That's fine. October 30th. And therefore, okay, so now I can read
November
the,
27th.
if you would like to go back to item 8A1, or I can
Yeah, let's
continue.
move it off the table. and-
Yep, second.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Chad, you look so
Yes,
different.
I know.
What did we
Sorry,
do to
guys.
you?
He forgot to tell me 6 instead of 7. I depend upon him. Anyway, sorry.
It's good to see
He did it
you.
on
Happy to be
purpose.
here for all of you. Okay,
We're on tab 6.
So,
thank you. Tab 6, I thought we just,
Change, and you need to look at it to make sure there's not an issue.
so we are wanting to
Yes.
incorporate our current
Multiplier.
which we've been grandfathered into,
okay,
just to kind of, as a place marker as to what it is that we were grandfathered.
And we thought to do it in the recitals, not in the body of the.
okay, you're talking about no, you're talking about tab
We're thinking is
6.
the fourth whereas.
Got it. Uh-huh. Oh, yeah, this is the one that's backwards a little bit here. Okay. The fourth whereas. 1, 2, 3, 4. What would you like to do there?
Katie, would you like to explain? You raised it and were very eloquent.
I just would like to state what it currently is, what our current minimum is. It could change in the future, but right now we're grandfathered in at 2.0 and not the 2.75, which is the current state's minimum for plans that have decreased benefits. Then you get kicked up to 2.75, but we haven't done that. So we're still
Yes.
at the 2.0. And I want to make sure that we know that, and we don't just assume that we're at 2.75 in the future when we read this. It could change, so we can't state that it's going to stay at 2.0, but just that it's currently 2.0.
Okay, so you want to insert the actual
Which is currently
multiplier?
Yes.
Just a parentheses that says
Yes.
currently at 2.0.
That's what I was
all.
going to say. Just put a paren. Current multiplier at, and then just the number.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
as much as I hate to
I
elaborate.
mean, it is what it is. I mean, I don't really, it doesn't, you're just stating the fact.
Correct.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with it.
Yes.
So the fact, though, includes the grandfather,
Do we
say
need
that?
to,
No.
because we are below the state prescribed minimum.
So do you think we
But
need
we're-
to add that extra bit, like currently 2.0,
No.
as we are grandfathered?
No.
but I think because we are grandfathered, it's good to establish it. Yep,
Because we are lawfully below the minimum.
correct.
So if we're going to say it, if we're going to speak to this point,
This is first reading, right?
Second.
Second reading.
I understand your point, Frank.
You can say whatever you want to say. Honestly, I really don't care. It is either true or it isn't. Doesn't make a difference because it's not going to affect.
Grandfathered at the current rate of 2%.
It's still not going to.
Grandfathered at the current,
if somebody reads this later and doesn't know what we know, they're going to wonder why there's an anomaly.
they were wrong.
Right.
So grandfathered at the current rate of,
Want to put
I
it in
agree.
there to
Yeah.
be
It
clear
needs to
for
be
anyone
clarified.
looking back.
Yes.
Okay.
Then we should add the word.
You could also, yes, you could either do that or as a footnote, which we have done from time to time, which then comes up when it's codified, it just ends up as a footnote.
I like the footnote, it's
Yeah,
cleaner.
I think it is.
I like the
good.
footnote.
Fine by me.
Okay.
So as amended, move.
So we're gonna be footnoting, it's really paragraph, whereas 3, isn't it? As opposed to 4, or am I wrong?
We thought 4 after statutory minimum benefits, currently 2.0.
I think 4, because this talks about
Fine.
the
Yep.
withholding.
Frank, you didn't pick the second line in the second whereas clause where it says last woe years?
I'm retiring.
Unbelievable.
I'm receding.
I can't believe you missed that.
Yeah.
Okay, the typo we need to correct the typo also in the second line in the third whereas clause that Frank did not catch.
You see, it should be
Last two.
last two. It's whoa.
I may be late, but I still know how to do this.
I thought it was part of the Me Too movement.
Okay, that's what it was.
Oh, Frank,
Okay,
that was
anyway,
bad.
we'll fix that. And we'll footnote the fourth,
Thank you.
okay, great, no problem.
As amended?
Call
I'm
it.
sorry if I can roll call 1 second. Councilmember Gross,
Yes.
Mayor Lindsay,
Yes.
Councilmember McCormick,
Yes.
Councilmember Moss,
Yes.
Councilmember Petros,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Kaplan,
Yes.
and Councilmember De La Cruz.
Yes.
The ordinance is adopted on second reading.
Next item.
Next item, if I may please read the title and continue it to a date certain. An ordinance of the Village of Key Biscayne, Florida, amending Chapter 2, Article 15, Youth Athletics Advisory Board to redefine the jurisdiction of the advisory board, providing for severability, providing for codification, providing for conflicts, and providing for an effective date.
Move.
Second.
We had removed this, are we going to do to a
If I
date
could-
certain?
If I may, I needed to read the title, and now if
put-
someone can make the motion to,
Move to defer.
Till October 30th.
may I have a second?
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. The second reading for this item will be October 30th, 2018.
Bless you.
At 6 p.m. Next item is a resolution of the Village Council of the Village of Key Biscayne, Florida, authorizing the village manager to issue a work order to the Cordino Group, Inc. to perform the 2018 Evaluation and Appraisal Report year, based amendments, and providing for an effective date.
Move.
Second.
Thank you.
Manager?
Thank you, Mayor. So this item is a work order authorization to one of our existing continuing services engineering providers, the Cordino Group. Funds are budgeted at $55,000 in the planning division to perform the comp plan amendment, which is the next step after the evaluation and appraisal report that was completed. The process will we'll probably wrap it up by April, May of next year. The proposal is attached. The fee proposal was subsequently distributed. I know some questions came up about the fee proposal that we can speak to. I have a representative from Corradino's group here to answer any questions.
Thank you. Yes, Katie?
I have questions.
Yes.
Can she come up? Because it was really just looking at how you broke down the costs. Because you broke it down, it was very easy to read, so thank you. You broke it down by phases, tasks, and then who would be involved in the tasks.
Yes.
And just a couple things that came up that I wanted to know about. The public outreach looked like it was described as 3 meetings that would be happening. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay, and then there was a lot of people involved in those meetings that I didn't understand, like many hours from the planning tech for the meetings. And can you describe why that happened?
Sure, yeah. Typically, there's a lot of kind of behind the scenes work.
May you please state your name?
Sorry. Yes.
Sorry.
Okay, Scarlett Hammonds, Senior Planner with the Corradino Group.
Thank you.
There is some behind-the-scenes work that to prepare for the meetings in general, and we, our planning tech is really generally involved in that. Specifically, with the 3 meetings, I budgeted approximately 3 to 4 hours for that person. But just to know that this applies across the board to all the hours that we've proposed, is that this is a not to exceed amount, and certainly, it will be adjusted if we're, if we don't use all these hours, and we wouldn't be charging you for it.
All right, the other question I had, the GIS mapping that you're doing, I just wanted to find out if this will be useful for us with our undergrounding project, because I know we had talked to you guys about 2 years ago about doing GIS mapping specific for our undergrounding, and I didn't know if this was the same technology and therefore we could apply it to this other project.
Right. I don't know enough about that project to be able, but certainly if there's anything of value that would be useful to you, it will be available to you to use for whatever you need. And we'll give you the files for the GIS work.
Yeah, go ahead.
And the flip side of that is, if it's already been done, can we provide it to them and have a cost savings? Because I believe that
GIS
we may have
technology,
some
it's
of it
universal. If you can, you can email back and forth, and if we could use it, then that would be wonderful.
And maybe for that, because I've heard of GIS mapping for a lot of things, so
Right.
maybe some
Right.
coordination with the village manager to make sure that we're doing the smartest thing. And if we can add something that they are doing that will help with undergrounding, we might get, you might get more use out of that.
Right.
The last question really was, or second to last, the future land map use, you stated that it would be the same as the last map in your overview here, but then you have like 15 hours of work going into it, so I didn't understand that. What would you be adding if it was going to be the same?
The line item for the future land use in the budget is for the actual element itself, the text changes, the policies and objectives. That was what was budgeted in here for the future land use.
So it's not going to be the same?
It's not for the mapping. No, it's the
map
land
is,
use
but
element consists of maps, and it also has text
involved in it.
Yeah.
Okay.
The map is going to change in a couple of respects. I mean, for example, the park at Heather and Hampton is going to be reflected as a park now.
Yeah, and we will, in our first workshop, we'll get all that information and make sure that we incorporate that as needed, and we can adjust if we need to make some map changes. I don't think that's going to be significant by any means.
Okay, those are all my questions.
Okay.
Any other questions?
It's important.
I mean, her question was as to the actual cost.
Sure.
She had, a lot of, yes.
The budget item was for the text changes, not for the mapping changes to the future land use map.
Council, are we ready to call the question?
We're going to learn a lot about potable water in doing this.
Yes.
Let's do it.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank
Next-
you. We look forward to it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next item, report and recommendations. Mayor and council members, proposed amended fee schedule. Mayor Lindsay.
Yes, this is actually proposed fee schedules. And while we were going through the budgeting process and dealing with things such as credit card fees and some other fee schedules that we had ratified, it came to my attention that we are supposed to be ratifying we're supposed to, one, have fee schedules, and two, have the council ratify that. And we have not been doing this. So just as best practices for this council, I wanted to bring it to your attention, kind of put it on everyone's radar. What I'm considering and what was brought to my attention is fees for the community center. We are actually supposed to ratify those. At one point, we had a community center advisory board, which helped with this, but the council step of ratifying was not implemented at that time. And same with youth sports. We're supposed to be ratifying fee schedules. And so that is something that we should put as part of our, agenda items and make sure that we are, one, have a schedule, and two, that we understand, and that's what the intent is of our policy decisions are aligned with the fees. This is a good opportunity to have transparency, a process, and good procedures. I know that with the community center, it just serves so many different residents. It has many different services. For a long time, there were a mission statement of, providing as many services and good affordable programming to our residents. We may want to make sure that that is in fact what we're doing, whether we're aligned. We have very high-end premium vendors, but then we also have very resident-friendly and on a different level programming that is accessible and affordable to everyone. You may want to see whether we are targeting it that right. There's nothing more important, I think, in the community center than to make sure that you've got that premium program that is highly desirable with the best possible teacher or vendor, but that you also have the flexibility. And so this is kind of the nuance of having someone who is a resident who has a talent, and there's a will to get together to make sure that that programming is also available. So just, I wanted to put this on your radar. Part of this also is the challenge of credit card fees and how you all want to handle that. Was that supposed to be something that was, and do you want to be consistent with all the programming, or do you distinguish where you want to pass through the credit card fees versus where you want to absorb the credit card fees? But these are all things that you all need to think about, and I just thought it was something that I learned during the budgeting process and wanted to share that knowledge. Yes.
So I understand that that the fees for the community center is something that we are supposed to sort of ratify or whatever the word would be, and we don't. And so that's important to do. But have you had some sort of feeling, or have had people talk to you that you feel that there's some other reason that we should be looking at? Because my experience has been that the community center offers those different levels of classes, from the free kids athletic class to the higher end stuff and the jewelry making it somewhere maybe in the middle. Or is there more?
So there's a couple of things. One is transparency, and so that people know that those are our goals and that we are meeting them and that it's accessible to everyone and it's transparent. Here's the fee schedule, look at it, it's published, we don't have that. We don't have that level of transparency, which I think would only make for better communication and support from our community. I think it's on that level. And for sports, there's always been the tension of the highly competitive sports versus providing an assortment of very affordable recreational sports so that you have a lot of kids engaged in the programming. And so part of checking the fees for that and having your finger on that, or having that on your radar, is to make sure that there is, lacrosse just started and it's very affordable and it's a huge hit. So it's part of just being in the know, being informed, and having that transparent process. So parents sometimes say, gosh, I wish, flag football came out, was established organically by a couple of volunteers. And we should know that that's all out there.
So beyond the course catalog, like you're saying, we should get some kind of document that comes before this body
Yes.
for us to, okay.
Yes,
That's what I'm
yes,
asking you.
yes.
Because I feel it is fairly transparent to our residents. When you want to sign up for a class, you know what it costs for members, non-members, residents, non-residents.
No, it should come, it's supposed to come to us.
Okay.
It's supposed to come to
So
us.
it's like a step that you
Yes.
feel we're missing.
Yes.
Okay.
It's all available on our website too, correct? The fees? And we have a survey. I'm a little confused on exactly what we need to do, and I want to understand it if we're missing a step. So you're saying
We're the only ones that are supposed to set fees.
any fees for any class?
That's my understanding.
Is that true?
Right, so I think it's section 220, actually, we have it handy. I think 221, it basically says that the village council sets fees after a public hearing. So I think what we did do was accept the membership fees for the community center, but there are some other fees that did not go through that process.
So basically, I mean, I would not like to see this body starting to get involved in saying how much this class should cost versus that.
I don't think that's the intent. I don't think we're going to get in the weeds on
But what you're saying
that.
essentially is that at the start of the semester, or when Todd's putting together his course catalog and his course listing and his prices, it should come to us for us to look at and say, once again, Todd, great job, or gee, why is this class so expensive?
Or just, thank you, yes.
Okay.
Hopefully not, why is this so, because he's got it all under control, right?
I'm sure we would only say, once again, great job, Todd.
Thank you for all this wonderful programming. These prices look great. Right? So that was just it. It was a housekeeping matter.
Okay.
I do think the credit card issue, though, I don't know if this is the time to do it,
It
but
is
we
as
need
well.
some consistency. And we spoke about in building and zoning doing a pass on of the credit card fees. And yet I really wasn't thinking about the fact that in the community center, we've been using credit cards for years and we don't pass on fees. So do we want to set up a different standard for these two areas of services in our village?
Well, one of the things that I thought was interesting, when we have vendors and they're contracted to give, to pay 30% for overhead, and they're essentially, because we're absorbing the credit card fees, they're paying about 20%. Because they're paying us and we're getting the 20% because we have to offset our cost of the credit card fees. So was that what was contemplated? And should we be contracting that differently? Do we want to pass those fees along? Is it permissible, and would it be a good policy for recreational sports, not pass it where you have a lot more volunteers or you have in-house programming? So it's not, the overhead is not a lot, absorb it, versus, outside vendors out of season, or, you need to kind of explore that as a policy decision. And
So maybe we ask the manager to give us an idea of the numbers that we're dealing with and the different areas or different departments where we're using credit cards. And we can have some recommendations when we know this, because I don't have any idea. And 10% seems like a lot. Credit card fees are 3%, aren't they?
Yeah, but what she's saying is that the pass comes only to our portion
So
of
it
the
doubles.
30%.
I was just making using a
it's a
round number.
bigger
What is that?
percentage that we
so-
use.
We can look at this as a whole, I think, and make a decision of how we think is best to.
Right, and a person may want to put it on a debit card as opposed to put it on a credit card and save that. There are options, but we need to educate ourselves and the public.
Okay.
So that was it.
Anticipating the conversation that will come, just as I sit here, I am thinking differently about the BPZ fees, the nature of the fee, than I am about, what's essentially a merchant service conducted through the community center.
That could be, but we need to have that discussion.
Right.
That could very well be. And is there, are there other fees that we're not even thinking about that are out there that require merchant fees that we really are not focused on?
I feel I'm similarly minded to Frank, that I would like to see the community center run more from the way a business would run it, of how do I want to deal with any losses that come with these fees, and just do the transactions and price it accordingly. Whereas I do feel differently about building.
Well, but then, do you pass it on to the consumer, or the option is, when you're contracting with a vendor, do they absorb the fee?
I don't think it makes that big of a difference, right? Because if you give it to the vendor, they're giving it to the consumer.
Well,
It's
maybe
gonna go
not.
to
You
the
can,
consumer.
you can
actually,
contract to
no.
that. You can contract to
But
that.
it's not only that.
You set a fee and,
Yeah, because if you take, let's say it costs $100 and you have a 3% fee on that, if we eat the fee and we're only making 30% of that, we're taking a much bigger hit on our
Correct.
portion. If you say that we'll put it on the consumer, then maybe the person who's holding the class wants to have a more competitive class against other people that might be holding something similar, then they would have to reduce the cost and eat some of the portion of that in order to take on that cost.
yes, and that's part of the contracting. It's part of, even in an RFP, you can put it, and
I
that's
think-
part of policy, yes.
It's all great discussion. I think our manager just, heard our ideas. Why don't we let her think about it a little bit and bring it back to us and tell us what she recommends, and then we can make an informed decision on it,
I think that was the whole point of this discussion, is so we could raise the issues for her to look
And
at.
let her know where our minds are
Right.
at,
Yep.
so that she can go and find the
But that's
information
my
that may best
concern.
serve.
Right.
Okay, thank you. Do you have enough direction? Do you need any more information?
I
from us?
will just comment that I would like to have our financial person on board before I report back, so if you can bear with me on timing. We'll have a
Absolutely.
much more comprehensive report once we have that person on board.
Could you also give us an average of what the transaction costs typically is in there? Is it $100? Is it $300? Is it $30?
So typically, the merchant services contracts, there's a range based on the dollar amount of the transaction and the quantity of transactions. So if, as a village, we're processing thousands or hundreds of thousands of transactions, the cost per transaction would be lower. Also, if there's a large dollar amount, sometimes the merchant services, the cost would be a smaller percentage. So it's really a function of our utilization. I have requested that from our merchant services provider to get some data regarding the number of transactions, the typical ticket, the quantity of tickets, so that we'll have some more.
But I was thinking that the consumer, if the average transaction there is $30, a 3% fee is very little for the convenience just to pay with a credit card versus the building and zoning. It might be a $3,000, which a 3% is significant, and they might think twice and say, you know what, I'm paying with a check. I'm not going to take this hit on this.
Yeah, so
I mean,
at
you
what
really
point
have to
does
make
it
a
curb
decision.
behavior, right?
Yes. So, which I'm still fine to pass it off on the building and zoning because, business owners will know enough to write a check and bring it if it really is an issue for them. But, somebody who's just paying for a class for $30 might not really care about 3% in the end, but it may be a lot more money on our end that really hurts us over a long period. So I think that would be an interesting information to get.
Right. Yes, we need that information to be able to take the next steps.
But just bear in mind with BPZ, the principle here is to keep it cost neutral and still provide the service. That's different than the community center.
Yeah.
So.
But we need to know the nuances, because you're right, it may be nothing, but we still have to have fees, and we need to look at this comprehensively.
I'll listen eagerly.
Maybe not. It might be after us.
Yeah.
Next item?
Next item, date for Park Master Plan.
Charette.
Mayor Lindsay, sorry.
Yes, I'm just following up on this. I know that we've discussed this for about a year now. We had an offer from Director Maria Nardi, who is a Harvard-educated landscape architect. She does work with Miami-Dade County, but she is passionate about parks in Miami-Dade County. She was willing to run or moderate a charrette for this community because it dovetailed into our 2040 plan and our strategic plan. It was part of gathering that information, as former council member Davey so eloquently stated, that it is part of public participation and really getting a sense, educating the public, and then getting a educating and consensus building. So it's a great opportunity. It's been thrown around for a long time. Let's not miss this opportunity. I know I will soon be gone, but please, I urge you, it's worth taking advantage of this. Any?
Look at the calendar,
Thank you.
set a date.
Were you looking sometime in November, December?
Can we do it earlier?
Please don't make it in October.
Would November 6th work?
I'm doing nothing.
Any time after November 7th.
No, I'm going to Allison's house on November 6th. That's right. Like I always do.
How about November 8th?
That would be very difficult to schedule something between the election day, so we're back at the same
Personally-
issue.
Personally, I think we should have the new council part of this.
Yes, of
Yeah.
And make sure that they're,
That
'cause
would
this is
I
going
think
to
we
be a
should have
very
both.
important.
I think we should have old and new.
I think we should
ideally.
try to have as many, it's a charrette, it's community
Right.
charrette, as many people as possible.
Charrette
So then maybe
invites
a little
everybody.
more
right?
time is
I would say early
advertising.
December,
okay.
mid-January.
And can we see how this could tie into the 2040
Well, that's-
as well? Like how,
Yes.
so we're not running
Yeah.
two parallel.
That's the whole
things going
point, is
on.
to dovetail and not to do parallel, but I think
Okay.
one is a component of the other.
Which one comes first?
I think the
This is a
charrette.
subset. This is sort of a subset of the minor subset, but an important subset. I want to speak to the value of pocket parks.
And parks, general parks, and how you plan for walkability, accessibility, connectivity,
And
and
ra-
what
and-
makes for good civic planning.
Right.
It's
The
a-
walking distance between parks, there's science on
science
this. We
to
don't
it.
have, we have not invented our
So let's do
master
mid-January.
plan as it is now.
Mid-January sounds like a good idea.
I can shoot for those dates and I can circulate those dates.
Okay.
with
We're
the
going to
city
need someone to
members.
coordinate with Director Nardi.
Or maybe we can do it based on, speak, who's going to speak to her and come up with some potential dates? The
About-
clerk?
about Jennifer.
Yeah.
Sure,
Could you do that for us?
no problem.
Okay?
And then maybe we can announce this at our next meeting of the date.
Thank you. Thank you.
Will do.
Okay.
Next item, update on utilities. Councilmember Moss.
Thank you. So I just want to give you guys a quick update, and I met with the manager, and we have a tentative schedule of when we're going to present the final document that the task force was tasked to do, which is the master plan and a few other components that go along with it. And we're looking at January presentation to the council. We do have to do a couple more meetings that are coming up, and Andrea, you can, interject anytime or want to explain a little bit more. But our conversation is that we're going to be getting a couple more presentations from FPL in October. We're going to be going through our template report in November, looking at different focuses of what we want to present to council. December, we're going to be meeting with Raf Tellis, our consultant that is looking at the assessment methodology. We met with them this morning, and I think they're on site this week and doing all of their site work and looking at property by property, and in order to go back to California and start putting that into their system. And that should leave us with a January presentation to council of what the task force recommends and the final document.
Okay? Sounds great.
Can you go through the components that will be presented on January again, please?
All right, so the components, the main piece is the master plan.
And is that completed? It should have been, or is it substantially completed?
It's very close to being completed. So over the summer, we had a draft report, and it's very far along. But there's a lot of questions that are still coming through the task force members because it's a lot of information to digest. It's hundreds of pages.
Communications, you said, is pretty much done.
Communication, it's not done, but it's being worked on, but it's an ongoing thing and it's being developed. But they do have a web page. We were looking at different graphics and things like that, and then kind of looking at the strategy of how we would address the communication. The fee assessment part, which is the Raf Tellis part, we're reviewing the voting process that may have to go through an assessment. And the last one is looking at possible funding strategies. What are the options on the table? And that could be a possibility that the task force can come up with a recommendation of maybe which could be the possible way to go.
Do you think, the one thing, and I don't know if we, and folks, I'm just kind of spitballing here, but for the funding opportunities, should that be coming from the task force, or should we do more of a bigger presentation of both maybe the council and the task force? Because I don't know that that's necessarily their area of expertise.
That's fine. I mean, I don't mind which way that part goes. I think
everything
funding
else is aligned with what I thought, but the funding,
Yeah.
I was not sure.
Funding is going to have to be a council decision, no matter what. It's going to have to be presented. It's just if you guys want to task that group to look at it and see what they think about it, they can do that. But they don't have to do that part. And it's just one less thing that the task force needs to look at, really. So either way, for me on the funding, I think it can go either way.
Do you feel that they're getting exposed to information that we maybe aren't by sitting on this task force and talking to these people? Are they out there exploring the way different communities have funded it, the way their residents have embraced different types of funding? Like, is there something that they maybe have that we don't?
Yeah, I mean, we've been more focused on the engineering part of it more than the funding. But we did have a presentation, I think 1 or 2, about funding at one point. I think that you have to remember that the task force is instrumental as the connection, as one of the connections to the public, as ambassadors buy in on the project, understanding all aspects of the project. So they can be very instrumental in breaking down those components, also funding, and why maybe some might be better than others. But they could do that after this is presented, and maybe council starts looking at funding, and you can work with the task force at that time, and we can continue them to help, help council and help recommend some stuff while council is looking at. Maybe it's a workshop with the task force and the council at the same time.
I think that would, I don't want
It's
it to
fun.
be perceived that council is punting, and I also think it might be duplicative.
Sure.
And as our ambassadors, certainly they need to be involved, but I think at that point, it needs to be more of a group effort.
As an ambassador and a sort of communicator of
Correct.
what they're learning in
Correct.
the community as opposed to a financial consultant.
Yeah, I think the methodology is the more important part. So
Um,
I'm a task force member.
Please come up.
Very enlightening discussion. John Ellisberg, 177 Ocean Lane Drive. I'm a member of this task force. Thank you, Mayor Lindsay.
You're welcome.
And I have, Brett gave a great response, but I think I need to add something that's here and just doesn't quite get said. And it's time to say it. This consulting, this master plan that was presented is enormously complex. It has probably at least 100 technical pieces that we've been absorbing. But in the process, each time you get to it, there is a cost issue. And we have been getting, and the only thing I think we would present to the council within these hundreds of pages here are a series of options as to how these things can be done and what the dimensions are, because we have been doing a tremendous amount of homework. And so I'm suggesting that the things you've been discussing are not stuff we've waved off. It's stuff where we've had presentations and discussions. And if you look at the 7 people on this council, on this task force, exclude me, there's some very bright people on it who have some very knowledgeable stuff about financing and bonds and taxes and blah, 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 blah. So I'm only suggesting that if we proceed the way we think we've been proceeding, I think we can, thank you, Madam Manager, be able to give you a whole series of information and options that will have already had a lot of stuff sorted out of it. It's not necessarily that we would be making any policy decision, but simply giving you some very, very short-term, long-term, very complex issues about how to do it, how to pay for it, when to do it, when to pay for it.
Not only that, we could also add, what's the pros and cons maybe of each avenue. So we could
Yes.
do a lot of that legwork
Yes.
in front to bring to council, so it doesn't become a 3-hour discussion about funding. That, a lot of this has been digested, and especially with a board that's already been involved with it for almost a year now.
Doesn't make sense for us to
And as you know,
We're not starting, but usually when you're dealing with financing, you're going to have presentations from financiers.
We have.
And I mean, I think that needs to come in front of the council as well.
I think it will,
You
yeah.
can't just get a document and say, so these are, so that to me, it's a redundancy. And I think it should be jointly with the task force, and if you guys want to go back and digest it, that's fine.
we're
But
just
I
trying to
think
say, we're just
that
trying to save
needs-
you all time. But the other point I wanted to make.
I think when it comes to financing, we won't save time. I
Maybe.
mean, that's where the rubber hits the road.
I just want to also make clear that what we have done and why it's taking so long is that your consultants did a very interesting job and a huge amount of stuff. Several months ago, we all really reached the point that we needed someone who was inside the village administration to absorb all of these things, because we did not have anybody within the administration who really knew anything about what these consultants were doing. And because it involves so much of the operation and of what's going to happen in the village, we asked our new manager if she would take on that responsibility of she and her staff, to absorb what's been thrown at us, so we could have an intelligent series of suggestions to pass on to you. So and that's why it's taken a little longer, but I think it's the way in which those of us who have been on this group, and there are at least 3 of us in
I
this
see that.
building right now, would be comfortable in presenting something to the council.
And you bring a good point, and it's no sense having consultants if we can't understand and manage the projects from the inside. And I applaud our new manager, and I applaud Jake, our new public works director, because we need to develop that in-house expertise and rely on the experts that we do have. Thank you for making that connection, all of you, and thank you for, being up for the task, both of you.
All right, thank you for letting me intervene here. I just wanted to.
It might be like the last time you do this, Don, maybe.
Tonight, probably.
Tonight, and with this, in front of this council, in front of this council.
Thank you.
In front of this council.
I have a couple
Yes.
questions. Can you speak about what happens after you present us with this master plan? Does this master plan, if I remember correctly, is this handed to FPL to start doing a design phase? What's the next step, and what does the task force also do as the next step?
All right, so when
We haven't
Yeah, no,
taken
that's the
negative
next step.
decision.
Yeah.
So once we have the master plan, it needs to be presented to council. Then it's going to go to the council to decide what we want to do. If we decide to go, by the recommendations or not, we can make changes, but it ultimately has to come to us and either moves forward or it doesn't. If we decide to move forward on the project, and if the recommendation goes to a possible special assessment, then that would go into a voting process that we would have to go through to make sure that the people who are the property owners vote on whether they want to do this project or not. But this document that we're going to deliver is going to show you how much, at that point, you're going to be able to punch in your property, and you should be able to know exactly how much you're going to pay out of the project. We also are going to have to look at, in the master plan, it's not just bearing the utility lines, but there's many other projects that are attached to it. So we're also going to have to say which ones do we want to do, which ones maybe we don't want to do, or which ones will come out of a certain special assessment, which ones would come out of ad valorem revenues. So we would have to make these decisions up here. So it's coming to us first. It's not going to move forward unless council decides to move forward, and it may not go special assessment. We might decide to go another route, and that could happen, and then we'll decide what route that is. But But if it does need a vote, we would have to go through a public vote. And then once we do that, then we would start moving forward with not FPL, but it would go back to our consultants if we go into design, and they will start doing their design work. And from there, our consultants will be working with FPL because they have to do some stuff in the front, like site surveys and things like that. And then once they have that, they can pass that over to FPL. So, and that would be a certain phase that we would decide on starting.
Can we, can you talk to the special assessment process so that we have an idea of if that's something that we would consider, what is the requirement?
Do we have enough information?
Yeah, well, I can tell you generally. First of all, by law, a special assessment is something that is not a tax. It is a charge or assessment against property for the benefit that that property receives from whatever improvement you're doing. Okay, so I'll give you a very simple example. When governments put in sidewalks, okay, typically the way the assessment works is if you don't pay for it from your ad valorem revenues and you want the community who's benefiting by that to pay for it, is you take the cost and divide it per foot by lineal foot, and if you have a 100-foot lot, then you pay a certain amount, and if your neighbor has a 90-foot lot, they pay a certain amount, and if you have a 50-foot lot, you pay half of a 100-foot lot, okay? So that's sort of a very simplistic way of looking at this. It gets very complicated when you're trying to do something like we're doing, which is to try to figure out the benefit per property for underground utilities, okay? Because there's a general benefit that everybody enjoys, maybe through the aesthetics. There may be a direct benefit because right in front of your property, you're going to have a new set of underground utilities that has a value that you can put to it. But you have multifamily buildings, which all of a sudden are difficult to assess, and condominium units because they have one line that's coming to one building, and now you got to figure out how to do it per unit, if you will. So that process is not by law required to be a public approved process. You need to go through a public process of doing it. It typically requires 3 separate hearings, but under your charter, excuse me, your code, not your charter, early on, I'm going to say 20 years ago, we enacted an ordinance that says if you're going to do a special assessment, you must have a vote of the people, property owners who are going to be assessed. So at the end of the day, Brett was saying, well, we have to go out for a vote. You might want to do that anyway because it's a very good sense of whether the community supports it or not. But here, your ordinance requires that you must do it. And what you would do typically is you would pass it, and then there would be a provision at the end of the assessment that says that this only is effective upon the approval of a majority of the voters, okay, or property owners, whatever it happens to be.
Would that be a special election?
It could be. It could be. If it happens to align with another election, then you'd have it then. But probably would be a special.
But Steve, isn't in the code, I think I read it, that it's a mail ballot to property owners only.
It's only property owners, but I'm not sure it has to be a mail ballot. You might be, you may be right. I haven't looked at it since.
For some reason, I have that in my head that it's a mail ballot only, and we would have to send it out.
It's only, it's not voters, it's property owners.
Mm-hmm.
And the election would occur, the timing of the election would occur after council approves the project.
That's the most effective way of doing it because then people know precisely what has been enacted. They can go and look at it. They know the ordinance or assessment resolution that's been passed, and there's no guessing. They are voting on a specific item. Mm-hmm. So that the way these things are generally done when there's a vote is they typically pass it, and then there's a provision that has an effective date, which is upon the passage of whatever percentage of the property owners.
Yeah, and we can't assume that it's going to pass. I mean, it could not pass, and the project we had to decide whether we want to move forward or not.
Right,
on
but what
if
it
we
does
have the
give you
support.
is it gives you as a council the ability to make a decision that you feel is correct and then put it out for a vote. As opposed to sort of having this straw ballot kind of thing and wondering whether you got the right input and didn't have the right input. It places that initial decision with you, and then if the public supports it, they support it.
Now, the funding also can trigger another vote.
Yep.
Because if we decide to go
Yes.
with the general obligation bond,
Yes.
then that has to go through referendum, and that would be a whole nother vote that would have to go through.
But that's a different form of financing. It's going
Yeah.
to be either or, not both.
No.
Or-
No, it
Well,
could be
there's,
both.
I don't know, Palm Beach did something weird. We need to look at it. Generally, it is a different type of financing. I mean, borrowing money and pledging the full faith and credit of the government to pay that back is a tax. So it is different than a special assessment. You're taxing people based upon the value of their properties, and that's what the general revenue bond does.
We would have to have that approved by.
Yes, yes.
The
The borrowing itself, I believe, is the size of that would require it.
So there could be a combination because there's different aspects that we will have to decide if we go with all the different aspects.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of decision-making coming to council. There's going to be a formal recommendation from your task force that's going to tell you that we have been looking at this for 1 year. We've been doing this, this, and this, and this is our recommendation based on the engineering, based on how the methodology we should pay for it and what may be the most equitable that we see it and why we see it that way. So we'll present it. But we don't need to take any of it. We can change it. We have to make the decisions up here. And then once that happens, we have to move forward. And if we go through special assessment, we'll have to go through a voting process before we continue going past that to make sure that the people are willing to do it.
And Steve, just looking at this in like a timetable way, can
Yes.
we call a special election just ourselves? We don't
Yes.
have to be on a Miami-Dade election date.
No, in fact, Brett reminds me that there is a provision for mailing out ballots, so that would not require you to be part of the county election process.
Okay.
I have another quick question on this. How are we communicating to residents what the alternative is? And is there anybody focusing on that part of it, the task force, the hardening, and what that would look like so that people understand that if we don't go this direction, it's not going to be status quo. We're going to have a change in how our power lines look, and it's going to be a dramatic difference.
Yep, that's one of our strategies in the communications is a few things. You know, we're looking at what will happen if we don't go through that project. We're also looking at actual data that's showing, you know, after storms, what happens with overhead power lines. We were also talking to the engineers today about mixed lines versus underground lines and how fast the reliability, how good the reliability is. So what the benefits are if we go this route, because if not, you know, we will have kind of this mixed and overhead areas that the reliability will be low. So there's many different strategies that we need to educate and show people that, you know, these are the alternatives, this is what would happen, and make sure that people know it. So the communication's a very, very integral piece and important piece that we need to continue working even after the task force. But they're part of our consultants. We're paying for that all the way through. So they're going to help us along the way. We may have to do workshops. We may have to do public hearings before we even decide to send any mailing ballots out, because we need, you know, to show people what this is and why it is. We can't just have a ballot one day show up on your doorstep and nobody knows anything about the project.
Do we have an understanding with Florida Power and Light regarding not hardening to a particular, is there a date that we've agreed to or at least discussed?
It's a good question, because as of right now, they know that we're moving forward. So I think they're not moving forward on their project. But I think your question is, once it comes to council, if it just sits on our table for 6 months, when does that starting up? So that's a good question. I think something that we're going to have to talk to FPL about, so that we know once it comes to council, what our responsibility is and how quickly we should start moving.
They do have a date.
They have a date, but they have other communities where they're in the process of hardening. They use us as the only example of, well, we haven't done because they are actively looking to bury the underground. So we're on their radar.
I understand that, but I was just wondering whether there had ever been a discussion of an actual date.
I think we're past that date, to be
Yes.
honest.
That's what I was getting
So
at.
they meant,
Yes.
So
they
that we
planned on
need to speed,
hardening us
we need to
before
speed
now.
up everything that we're
Yes.
talking about. It's great to talk about it and talk about it and talk about it, but we need to be brought to
We need to
council.
be active.
We need to be active. We need to make decisions, and that's what we get paid the big bucks.
And one other thing which I want to clarify, if for some reason that you decide to use a general obligation bond, that election would have to be coordinated with the county.
Okay.
Okay, so you will have some, either that, or we could work with the county to run that election, but it would be a special election and it would be rather expensive
Yep.
to do that.
And that's why
So-
funding's an important discussion to have quickly, because we need to know what direction we're thinking about going into.
I don't think you could make a decision on council, and I don't think you could ask the electorate to make a decision on the project without having the funding element baked in as part of the decision.
Of course.
Well, no one's suggesting that. It's
Yeah.
just a whether.
Speaking about funding, I know that our manager was working this week on getting some facts on rebates that we would get, and I wanted you to just let everybody know what you've learned so far and what you're looking to understand that you haven't heard back from FPL on.
Of course not.
So there were two components. There is a state rebate that we looked at, and I think the calculation we came up to that it could be upwards of 3.3 million that the state could contribute toward the project. And there is a formula that FPL uses that would FPL could contribute a portion of the cost based on what it would have cost them to harden, right? So if there's a requirement placed on FPL to harden, basically the village is now going this alternative path. If the funds that were allocated to the hardening, a portion of that might be available to us for reimbursement to this project. And it's a pretty complicated formula. We've given the preliminary cost estimates from the master plan to FPL. They're running the numbers, so that number will be included in the report.
At one point, someone from FPL was before us and said that there was another
Yes.
credit.
Yes.
And it was for the service calls that they will not presumably need to come once we are undergrounded. So
like
when you talk to
17%.
them, we need to make sure that we have that one too.
Okay, thank you.
Katie, there was at least one conversation about if we don't go down this road, what is the alternative? Because of the installation, I think, across from the school. Do you remember?
Yes, and those poles,
Right.
and we know that not only are they going to be taller and larger, the concrete poles, but they will be closer together.
Yes.
So there's a very different visual to our community regardless of which path we go, and we need to understand that, and then the cost of going one direction or the other.
And what's happened in some communities is they've started the hardening, and people who did not have a visual have gone into hysterics and, oh my God, and what's the alternative? This is unacceptable. So it's interesting we need to really understand that.
Pinecrest
impact.
is one of them.
Pinecrest is one of them.
And I think that that they're going to be significantly taller, not just wider.
Correct.
Which
Correct.
means that they will be that much more visible.
Yes.
Okay.
And I believe some of the poles will be brought from the back to the front also,
Oh, really?
potentially.
I
I don't know for
I didn't
sure.
know that.
But
I haven't heard that, but I think we've seen in our beginnings of these conversations, we saw some amazing visuals that different people had come.
You brought
and-
some.
Yeah, I took a
You
photograph.
took
And,
some.
well, no, of our actual streets.
Without.
With the way they currently look, the way they would look undergrounded, and the way they would look hardened. And I wonder if,
Paul
not
Abbott
not
did
to
that.
give more,
Paul
not to
Abbott.
give more work to the task force, but maybe if some way in putting together some of your communication and outreach piece, if we could get some visuals like that, maybe in a format that could be on our website, so that people could go to it or share. Our residents love to share things through our social media and WhatsApp chats and whatnot. Maybe we could start seeing some of those things flowing around so people could really know what we're up against.
Don't tuck pictures from Chernobyl in thinking we won't notice.
Sounds like great ideas. So we're going to work on that, and in January we'll bring it back to you guys, or some of you guys, and
Thank you.
we'll get
Thank
this-
you
get
for
this
your,
moving forward.
thank you guys for your hard work. It's, I know, a difficult task force committee, and you have put in many, many hours at highly, very complicated material. So thank you.
Next item, Mayor, is discussion on strategic plan and 2040 vision plan. Council members Petros and Moss.
Should we tag team? The reason that I brought this forward was because after our budget, we have all spoken multiple times on how we have large projects, of which we just had a healthy discussion on, and that we need to prioritize and set up timelines. And I very much want to have a version of this in place prior to budgeting for next year, because I want it to have an impact on our budget. So I don't know if we want to, this is a shorter term thing than the vision, community involvement. I think these are things that are already on our plate, but we can't do them all at once, and we need to prioritize. I've spoken to the manager about this. One of her suggestions was to allow her to come back and give us some people that could potentially facilitate. It doesn't need to necessarily go out to RFP. I personally would like to see us have a facilitator in place for our council as soon as possible to have, and the public can come and be involved, obviously, but to have these discussions about the projects we've been discussing, at least for the 2 years I've been here, and to put some priorities in place. So
I think that this is right. This is exactly right. When we were talking about this, at some point along the way, there is a ranking, a prioritization of all of the projects that were identified in the strategic plan. That was like 2012, roughly? 2013. And so the thought was to start with that. They're the same projects. I think only one has actually been done since then that I can think of, which is the easement between Harbor Drive and Calusa. There may be some others, but I consider that a major accomplishment.
So if everyone was in agreement, and we can have more discussion on it, but if we could ask her to come back at our next council meeting with either a couple names or a name that she thinks and why, justification of why this person is a good person. And then if we pick that person, we can set a date to have this workshop or planning session.
Do you want to see the 2013 prioritizations?
Yes, sure, definitely. Maybe we could all look at those prior to this.
I thought you circulated, Jenny, not too long ago.
I can do
Please
it again.
circulate them again.
That's a great idea, and let's move forward with it.
Okay.
Thank you.
So the 2040, so it really wasn't that close. So, but yeah, I agree with everything you said. So a strategic plan is very, very important. The 2040 vision plan, I was having some discussion with our manager, the administration, and I think that's something that I would like to talk to all of you up here about how we want to move forward on this. What Mike Davey came up and spoke wasn't necessarily 100% accurate. I did not say that we were all going to vote for a non-committee, but there has been talk from the administration that this could be done without a committee, with having immense amount of public input as a possibility. I'm really open to either or. My one concern was trying to push this quickly enough that we could maybe get it into our amendment of the year. It may not be possible. And if it's not, it's not. I mean, one of the ideas is that maybe if it did not go through committee and had input in another way, that we could move it a little bit quicker. But if the will is to have a committee made, I'm okay with that too. I think it will take a little bit longer to get it done. I don't see that we're going to be doing another one of these from scratch. I think a lot of the work has already been done. And when you read the 2020, it's such a great document. However, there's a lot of things outdated, things that won't be done because there are already projects, other type of projects have already been done in place. There are new considerations that we have, new demographics. So there's things that need to be updated in this to take us over to the next 20 years that will help us develop much better our strategic plan. We probably won't be able to get the 2040 in for this strategic plan coming up, but I'm hoping that we would have it for the next strategic plan. I don't know if we'll be able to get it in the year either, but I'm open to whichever. And I talked to Andrea that if we decided to go without committee, it would need to be planned out in a way very clearly of where and how the public input would be put in, and making sure that that's the largest part of that process. I'm not for us just to make decisions up here without having public input. We need to have the public input on a vision plan. And I also see what Mike Davey came up and spoke, the importance of having a committee. So I'm open for either way, and I'd like to see if we can have a small discussion on that.
I've given the manager my thoughts on this, which run toward, I think, the rather critical importance of having a committee, small and managed, but independent of council. I've done this, I think, every time we've gone through a strategic planning session or a comp planning session since before incorporation. And it's my opinion that the purpose to be served is not just the substantive result, but the kind of enfranchisement for its own sake, the community building for its own sake that comes from people being directed to go off and take responsibility. And as the task force on undergrounding does, understand, the manifest components of master planning, and frequently feedback to council and interact with the community in the meantime. That's an important byproduct of the process that's independent of the work product itself, in my opinion. I also think that and I think this is also rooted in my own experience, the substantive quality of the planning itself is different when it's not influenced by council. The spontaneity and creativity runs the risk of becoming a little dissolute and sometimes inefficient, but that's where council has to guide and direct and sort of, manage and oversee. But the quality of the discussion, if it's on the dais, is very different than if it's in a room somewhere else. And then it comes back to the dais and it's discussed in public. It's a different experience. The other things, there's an element that's a decision. The 2020 is specifically not included in the comp plan. It was a decision not to. So thinking about the timing and coincidence of the EAR amendments would only be meaningful if the decision was to include all or some material part of this work in the EAR amendments. And I can tell you why the decision was made at the time of 2020 not to do that. It was to keep that plan aspirational and not legal, to not be legally bound to do things that were identified at the time as aspirational. There's one element now that seems different to me and very important, which is the demographic changes in the community. I suggest to you all that the EAR is going to pick up on that anyway, and that needs to be part of the comp plan and will be, independent of all this work. This work, I think, will have to touch on that subject deeply and meaningfully too, but it'll be simultaneous and superfluous with what the EAR amendments are going to have to cover. So at least for that important component of what the EAR amendments are going to include, I don't think this work needs to proceed simultaneously. So those are my...
Allison, I want to jump on I think we need a committee, and I'll tell you why. For one, I am in agreement with you, Brett, that I don't know that we need the full scope of what was done at 2020. We have that document, we have that format, we have, staff can go through it and update and weed out what is no longer relevant. But I think the aspirational aspects that Frank talked about is exactly why we really need a committee of residents. And the demographic change, not only do I think this committee would need to address it in terms of the aspirations for the vision for the next 20 years, I would like to see an opportunity for sort of old and new coming together, creating the vision together, and have some sort of education and handing over of a baton of, this is how we do it in Key Biscayne. We come together. We have residents who are here every meeting. And unlike us, they're not getting the big bucks to come, right? They're here anyway in those really uncomfortable chairs. And this is what makes our community great. And I think that we have new residents that come in that don't know. And if given the opportunity to work hand in hand to create the vision for the next 20 years and to learn from people who maybe sat on the committee in the past or have been involved in some other ways, I think that's going to be something that comes out of it that will not be in the document, but really could be essential for us trying to keep the village in the village for the next 20 years.
Yes.
How much have people reached out to your committee, the task force, the undergrounding task force? See, I'm like torn here. We are a committee, okay, and then forming another committee that's not us, that people don't know how to get in touch with, like they get in touch with us all the time, and give us input and such. And I'm wondering, have people come to the committee and gotten involved? Is that something that's happened, or?
There's a few people that come to many of the meetings.
Yeah, but I mean, there's 7 of us here, and I know that how much.
But I'm not actually on the committee, so I would maybe defer to, I don't know, Ignacio is on the committee.
But I think that you're only exponentially increasing the number of people you're going to be reaching.
That could be.
They're still coming to the 7 of us, and we're still going to be part of the process. But I also think that when you have these committees, part of their task is for them to reach out, not just to be there to
You
receive.
asked a question. I would just say it's all about community outreach, setting dates, explaining to people, putting out the information that they should participate and putting it out there. We do have incredible community participation. We all get contacted every single day of the week at, everywhere all over town about issues that are important. This is a very important issue, and we need to get community buy-in. We need to include them, we need to inform them, we need to invite them, and we need their buy-in.
Yeah, well, okay. Again,
I'll
I'm
tell
torn
you,
about it.
2020 meetings, first of all, they're all sunshine meetings. They're held at the BPZ conference room. That was prior to the time that the office was established where Mariana sits. That room was filled. And that committee was 2 years, and that room was filled. The Islander covered it. But one of the responsibilities of the committee and council is to gin up that public participation.
Exactly.
So long as we can do that, and we can get people involved, and we can get people to attend the committee meetings and get involved, I'm all for it. I just want to make sure that's.
Let's state here what we want to see. What is the end game of our 2040 vision plan? What are we looking to produce at the end of the process?
To set the stage for the 2060 vision plan.
Exactly. And then the 2080, right?
So we take this and we update it and we expand it and it's pie in the sky, or is it?
A lot of it is very aspirational.
Okay.
Yeah.
But
it's not as concrete as a strategic plan. It's more aspirational in nature, but really giving direction.
But there's a difference between aspiration and pie in the sky. It's not useful if it's really pie in the sky.
Aspirational.
But I see it also as somewhat of a vision master plan too, where it really looks at what we want to do overall and puts everything together. And I think that it was done pretty well last time, and it can continue to improve, and we can really use that to develop our yearly strategic plans.
There's two things, apart from the demographic change, which is profound between now and then. One thing is what we were just speaking to a moment ago. The process of doing this itself helps to pass the baton. It really does. And if it's done well, it effectively achieves that result apart from what the plan itself says. Going through the process is like making a marriage between people that are either marginally participatory or don't participate, and those community gadflies that are here all the time and participate extensively. The other thing, this is maybe a little bit different now, but I submit this for your consideration. The people that worked on that 2020 plan wrestled, I would say, enormously with what eventually boiled out of that committee's work, which is keep the village in the village. It was an existential thing for the 23 or whatever the number of participants then was. And it was relevant because things were so obviously changing in the community. And the old-timers remembered a kind of informality and sort of community zeitgeist that at the time we worried was disappearing. And if we cared about it and wanted to protect it and perpetuate it, the first thing we had to be able to do is describe what it was. And not just for ourselves, but so that it was understandable to people that don't participate. And I think the 2020 Vision Plan, if it did nothing else, it did that.
I agree.
It did that. Now the question is, do we need to do that again? Do we need to do it better? Do we need to do it different? Do we need to shine a spotlight on it and say we really mean it this time? It's a thing that's going to come out of this work.
Brett.
I mean, to me, it sounds like most of us are in favor of making a committee, a citizens committee. So I'd like to make a motion that we go this direction and we go ahead and make a committee and we start moving forward. Because I want to see us move forward.
I second it.
How are we going to make the committee?
Yes, that's extremely important.
Well,
how was it done last time? I'm sorry.
You said it was 23 people?
I don't think it was 23,
But how did
but
the
committee
committee
is-
members get selected, and how did we get a wide breadth of people?
Why don't we have someone pull the ordinance that was passed for the last committee so we have an idea
Brett,
of what
open
the
your
process
cover
was?
On your plan, the committee's identified.
I mean, I know the
But you
people
just
that
wanna
are
know
in
what's
it.
the
I want to know the
process of
process.
selecting
She wanted
people,
to know,
how
yeah.
we're going to do that this time and how many people are going to be on it, you know, that kind of stuff, which I think we can bring back an ordinance. And I mean, we can have that discussion now to give direction as well.
Well, one thought that the manager and I were kicking around was to invite the people that are still here that were on the 2020. They're the old timers. And as the Citizen Engagement Academy tried to do, identify people that are sort of obvious comers, people that are demonstrate an interest and continue to contribute in various ways. And then the question might be the same way we appoint committees generally, advice and consent, and the mayor does it.
And I think there's some people that may have some expertise that in planning and things like that, which I know that went through in the last one, but there might be new people here that that we can, you know, bring on as well.
The only thing I would recommend, again from experience, the ordinance that formed 2020 specifically required a certain number of architects and a certain number of lawyers. And I don't think that's a great idea. I think it's fine to have architects
So you
and
said
lawyers.
just get rid of the lawyers and
Yeah.
use architects?
It's just not, because in real life what happens, the type of contribution that you think you're getting that is expert in nature, first of all, is there's plenitude of expert contribution that comes from the community generally without requiring professional credentialing. And secondly, you may remember this from our experience working on this together. The single issue, single-mindedness
I see a tunnel vision
that professionals can bring can subvert what would otherwise be a more creative process.
Well, and what we're looking for is sort of that, you know, looking down from 10,000 feet. So you're, like, for me, the diversity I'd want to see in the group would be more almost intangible, but like the types of, like, I'd like to see different cultural groups represented, different Who does the, adult rugby? Who's on the landscape committee? Who's the different aspects of our community coming together, and a mix of maybe some people who sat on the 2020. So there is that passing of the baton, but not to reconstitute, like not get the band back together, but rather mix it up.
Yeah. And one thing that happens at the committee, the committee's organization,
and we're different,
under council's direction, will require there to be categories of attention. And when, for example, the category of attention is rec, sports and rec, or culture, or education, or you name it, the committee with council is going to go find that constituent interest group and bring them into that discussion.
And the other thing is that, we will have a consultant that will be working with this committee, a professional consultant that will help focus into that expertise as well. And that could bring up another discussion maybe after we vote on whether we want to do a committee or not. But who hires the consultant? Should we hire it and give them to the committee, or should the committee be the one doing it? And maybe it's better that we just hire and give it to them.
We
Myra,
can't delegate to committees.
Do you have an opinion about this? Remember the 2013 strategy?
Yes.
We went to Coconut Grove to get off-site, to take a field trip. A lot of people came, even though it was in Coconut Grove. We had a facilitator, you remember?
Yes.
Okay, so here's the
The
thing.
question is whether the facilitator helped or hurt.
This is a process that's going to take some time.
I'll
you know.
answer in a
Okay,
second.
so, and there are at least 3 people, maybe 4, that will be new on this council in 1 month, okay? And the people, the other 3 that are here are going to be here for 2 years, and the other ones will be here for either 2 or 4 years. So.
Good math.
What's that?
Good job on the math.
So.
You could be on the undergrounding task force.
Right, so, oh, thanks. So we need to put, some thought into that, because, we're sitting here and thinking about, let's appoint a committee. And I think that, that we need to be realistic, that there's going to be 7 people here, more than, at least.
The new council will be the one who brings in the new committee, because this will have to go through ordinance.
Right.
It will be 2 readings. The
Right,
second
and
reading will be a new
I can
council.
tell you this much, from what I've heard, appointing a consultant will either happen now or will not happen.
Well,
Okay, so
Well, why don't
I
we
don't
just
know that a
stick to
consultant-
the agreement about a committee? And then the second thing I think is a good idea is if we were to come back at the next meeting and think about the different constituencies of this community, each one of us, to come up with an idea
Lay the
of how
groundwork.
we think the committee should be established
And
of
to
these
the
different
point that
areas.
this will be voted on by a different body, I think they're watching, and there's a real value in listening.
Yes, of
starting
course.
the discussion and
we're
imparting
listening
wisdom.
to people who went through it once already.
No question about it.
And I think that's exactly, Allison, why we're
Especially my
doing
learned-
this.
my learned
That's
friend
exactly
here.
why we're doing this, is to impart that wisdom, to share that knowledge, to pass the baton. I do, and Frank, to answer your question that you asked, did I think consultant helped or the facilitator helped? I think the facilitator helped in strategic planning and getting the process done. I think maybe we could have found a more effective facilitator, but I think where we failed is in implementation of the plan and having it be our bread and butter of decision-making and prioritizing. There was a disconnect there. And if you went to other communities, their strategic plan was incorporated into everything they do. There's a community I went to, actually Fort Lauderdale, where their strategic plan was put on laminated placemats with an infographic, and it really was, just really helped the focus. We lost that focus. There wasn't a whole lot of buy-in at the end.
Despite prioritization.
Despite priorities, and they're still the same priorities, ironically.
The one thing that occurs to me that the facilitator, so the question is, should there be a facilitator or not? The one thing that the facilitator, putting aside whether the person could have been more excellent at it, did that's necessary is to keep track
Correct.
of the conclusions. Somebody has to basically be the scribe. And while you're engaged in the discussion, it's difficult to do that.
And not only keep track, but actually eliminate and focus in on the real priorities. Otherwise, people don't want to hurt other people's feelings. There was consensus building and there was a process of elimination that sometimes it's hard to do as a collective group.
Myra?
Yes.
Real quickly,
Yes.
with those thoughts, we were discussing a facilitator for the strategic planning part of it that I was discussing earlier, that I think everybody would agree for all of those issues. And then maybe with the committee part of this, we can just agree to have a committee and then make a determination later on how that would move forward.
I agree, and I think that's a good idea. We may want to have some kind of leader or facilitator for the public processes, not just the council, but have someone who is. That's where I think the facilitator would come in for the public charrettes, the public process, not so much for the committee, but for the
In
other
2020,
components.
it was actually Wallace Robertson Todd, who'd been around in pre-incorporation, so they had some groundwork. But they did the big workshops. There were several.
That's what I'm thinking for the workshops you need.
They didn't participate really at all during the day-to-day, but they facilitated the big workshops.
So I think we're aligned.
I'm ready to vote on the motion.
What's the motion?
The motion is to form a committee for the 2040
Don't you
vision
have to
plan.
have like a number to
No,
We have to bring back an ordinance. The ordinance will describe that. It has to go through 2 readings. So the new council will be
Yeah.
adjusting
We'll
that.
talk
So
about it at first reading.
The way we've done these in the past is,
Look at the old ordinance.
No, we just leave how many members, what the makeup of the members is, and you're going to have to fill that in. We'll give you the framework of the ordinance and what the purpose of the committee is, and then the council decides who you want in it.
I second the motion.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Can I just add to
Motion carries.
Katie mentioned that in the interim, we should all be thinking about what different
Well, let's put this,
demographics we want to have represented, included, and
let's
start
put this on the agenda for our next meeting.
Well, and a
To have
call
a discussion on committee makeup.
Okay, but,
Yes.
so we're going to direct what the next council is going to.
No, we're going to talk and share our ideas, and they
Good. Good idea.
will come.
It's just to
and they'll-
bring back
they'll be
to
listening.
have the discussion.
Have a great discussion. That's great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I wanted to just,
Yes.
taking us from vision back to now, I wanted us to restate, we talked about capital projects in our budget.
Yes.
Let's talk about exactly what's happening this year that we agreed upon, just to make sure that everybody knows, because it can get lost in the budget. 530, what's happening on 530?
A park.
We're moving forward on that.
Yes.
The 3 things that I knew, the lighting for the parks, I think, is happening as we speak. The lights have come in, is that right? And
Well, there are lights in 530 right now
no, I'm talking about the playground lighting.
for
Those
Fernwood.
lights aren't for 5:30.
What about for
What are they
is
for?
the park getting its lighting right now, Todd?
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
And then the other big thing was the undergrounding, moving that forward. And
Correct.
And that's all that we have right now? Is that accurate?
Yes.
At this point.
Yes.
Okay. All right. That's it.
Okay. Next item, please.
Next item, a discussion on Lime Bike. Councilmember Petros.
Okay, this is really just a status update to let you know where we are. I met with the manager and Todd and a representative, the current representative of Lime Bike. This is the 3rd person since we've put the program in place. And I think things are running pretty smoothly. I haven't been hearing complaints. I found out the way that they operate is to come and sweep our island every morning at 6:30 in the morning and get the bikes back up. and we have about 150 bikes on our island. We've capped it at that. My understanding in the community, bike sharing is running rampant throughout many different communities, and they're adding scooters, electric scooters. So we have requested not to have electric scooters on our streets. And one of the things, though, is they also have what's called an electric assist bike that many of us used on July 4th. And if we want to add those to our community, we can do it, but we have to agree to 50 bikes. And we can not add 50 bikes so that we end up with 200 bikes, but basically swap out 50 of our 150 with electric assist. They're about double the price. It gets, when you swipe it, I think it's in 30-minute increments. I thought it was a good idea. I don't know if anyone will even necessarily, they don't look any different. They act different. Kids will pick up pretty quickly which ones are assist.
They're different on the app.
And they're different on the app, and they cost a different amount. But as far as impact visually to our community, it's really not going to be any different. So I thought it was a good idea, but I just wanted to lay that out there to see what everybody else thought, whether we should be including that.
How fast do the assist bikes go?
It's not a just purely powered bike. It's not an electric bike. You have to pedal it to make it go. And I rode one
for 4th of July?
Yes.
We rode them, and
Do you think that they're dangerous?
I don't think
On
that-
4th of July, they
Okay.
were. On 4th of July, definitely had kids running in front of me. I was like, oh my God.
That's
But
different.
I think
On a
normally
parade
they're
route.
not.
Do go fast.
You have one and
I
you
have
think,
one. They're
Steve has one, they're definitely not dangerous.
Is that how you show that you're exercising when you're really not?
Yes.
Can I
I will defer to you, I'm agnostic as to this.
I think that's a great idea if we're going to keep the Lime bike for sure. I mean, let's try it. Why not? Do we have any idea if these people are making any money in their business model?
They've gotten incredible funding. Are they
I know that
actually?
part.
And they're like they've now have a partnership with Uber, and I don't think he didn't tell me one way or the other, because one of the questions I actually asked him after our meeting is, can we rely on you being here in our community, and is it a revenue positive thing? And his words back were that we were one of the first communities that were very valuable, and they plan on staying here long term. He did not tell me that we were profitable.
Political answer, huh?
Now,
The prices went up.
the prices went up a little bit, yes. The other thing that you should know is the city of Miami has reached an agreement with them to put the scooters on their streets.
Right.
So we will most likely see some of those scooters on our streets.
Let's look at them.
So my concern is we have golf carts, and I think that scooters and golf carts can be
They go about 15 miles an hour, so they go the same speed as your golf cart, too.
Yeah.
And
50 miles an hour?
15.
1.5.
1.5.
And you can
It's like
pop
about
wheelies.
the same as the pedal assist. It's about the same as the pedal assist, right? I think the pedal assist is slower.
Unless you're, it depends on how much effort you're putting
They would
into it.
definitely be used a lot if they went
Well, the
50
thing
miles an hour.
that is an issue for me with the scooters is the speed and the stability, but also kids jumping on and off without helmets, right? When you're
Yes.
walking down the street and there's a scooter there, you're not planning on scooting, you don't necessarily have your helmet. I mean, it's hard enough to get them to wear them when they're leaving the house and they're getting on the scooter. So that
I think there's a few components to the scooters. Number one, we'd be adding more devices around the island, which we've found at one point they had more than 150 bikes on this island, and people were not happy with it. So we've reached kind of a good equilibrium. If we were to introduce scooters, we may disrupt that. We may feel the need to try it, and what's going to happen is City of Miami scooters are going to end up over here on Key Biscayne. So I think you should know that we are not, because people may think that we've said, yes, bring these to our streets. We have not. Okay? And we'll see what happens with those scooters, those errant scooters that land on our
when they do their
streets.
4 a.m. sweep, presumably they'll be picking up
They
scooters.
will.
Yes, Brett.
I mean, I personally am not a big fan of the scooters. I kind of like the idea that There's this health aspect too, that
Yes.
people are actually active, and there's an exercise component to it that's getting you from one place to the other. Another question: if they go 15 miles an hour, do you have to have a license to drive a scooter at that speed?
I don't know.
At what speed until it becomes a motorcycle or something? I mean, you need a license to drive a motorcycle. At what speed do you need a license to drive a scooter? Because can little 8-year-olds get on these things and just start driving them around the street?
Yes. Oh, we have an answer.
Well, I don't know.
I don't think they're considered
We have some
Definitive
insight.
answer.
We have some insight.
Maybe a little bit more. Good evening.
Good evening.
Honestly, I'd have to do some more research on the scooter aspect of the whole thing. You did mention safety, though, combined with the golf carts and the cars, and the tremendous amount of traffic that we now have on the key. It would be a concern, but like I said, I'd have to research that more. I'm not sure it's a speed that determines the license aspect of it. So I'm not sure on that, but I can get back to you very quickly.
Yes, I mean, there's a safety concern too, and this is a pretty new technology for them. I think communities want them and people are using them. Whether or not long-term it's safe and it looks good and all of those things are to be determined. So I think it's nice that the city of Miami is doing this ahead of us. They literally are doing it October. They start the 12th or the 15th. So it's coming.
All right, so we'll be able to see how that works, and then we'll see.
Right.
But in the meantime, we're bringing the other ones, right?
Yeah, I think unless anybody has a concern about it, Andre and Todd can tell them to go ahead and
swap out 50 of them.
50 of the bikes.
Try it.
I think that's a good idea. Just
Thank
an
you.
anecdote
Can we
on the
ask while the
scooters.
police are here that they watch and try to monitor as these electric bikes come, how it looks on the streets?
And I'll do some research on it immediately.
There's got to be
so I'll
some
have more
law in that.
information.
There's got to be some legal restrictions.
I don't know. I'll tell you though, just purely anecdotal, because I work on Brickell, and they're all over Brickell. And you're right. They're popular scooters. They're popular, but the situation is bordering on chaotic. There's a lot going on in a highly dense, mixed-use type of a thing, and scooters actually confuse people, I think. There's joggers, there's walkers, there's bicyclists, there's people with baby carriages, all coexisting in the same space, and all of a sudden, the scooters are rather silent, and suddenly someone's upon you in close proximity, and it's...
Well, and there's been accidents in other municipalities, and some communities are banning them. Yep.
When it's king tide, we could have paddle boards on the sidewalks.
We could put one right in front of the school.
That's all I have for Lime Bike unless you have any questions.
Nope.
Steve has persuaded me that I will like the electric bike.
Oh, my God, you'll never get off of it.
I can't wait to see you on one, Frank.
I won't ever
In your
admit to using
retirement.
it.
On the 4th of July?
No. I won't use it out of pride and stubbornness.
Yeah.
Our residents will be happy.
you
because
do.
those 4th of July bikes, lots of people are like, can I take that one?
Next item.
Next item, policy discussion, executive package, village council.
I don't know whose item this is, but
Seems like it's a collective item.
I guess it is.
Is this about remuneration for council? What is this?
It was
this for us?
discussed. It was discussed during the second budget hearing. I believe Councilmember Petros brought up the issue, and then it was directed to move it to the next regularly scheduled.
This has to do with the line item in the budget for additional retirement funds for specific members of the fire department.
Oh, okay.
This has been the subject of some emailing in recent days.
Yes.
If I could speak on this, I would really like to. By the way, I'm really sorry I'm missing this meeting because it looks like it could be the shortest meeting in the entire history of the council.
He did that deliberately.
I know it. Thanks a lot.
Where are you, Gary?
I think I'm in North Carolina. We had a family reunion, and I could not get back in time for the meeting. So,
I hope he didn't
but I would really like to speak on this. I think it's become a lot simpler than it was when we first discussed the concept of an executive comp package. When we first talked about what we thought we wanted to do with a retirement plan, it was far different than what we ended up doing. And what we originally talked about involved having a hard cap or a some limitation that could really limit the ability, especially of our chiefs, to get an equitable benefit. What we ended up doing, however, with the 80% funding mechanism and a cost of living increase every year and no hard cap, gave them a really significant benefit. So, for example, Chief Herring went from 95,000 to 128, and he had a 34.5% increase. Chief Lang had a 38.8% increase over what he would have had on the old plan. Chief Osorio had a 48.7% increase. And in addition to that, the increase isn't capped because it does increase every year as the COLE takes effect. So I think, to me, what we have to address right now is what I've always considered to be one of the most erroneous parts of our plan, and that is having someone contribute to a plan to fund their own benefit and not really getting an increase in their benefit based on what they're contributing. And I think that's what's happening now, because all three of these chiefs will hit the 80% within a relatively short amount of time, and if they continue to put in their 10.5% contribution every year, they're not going to be getting the benefit out of it that they would have gotten had they not hit that maximum. All they'll be doing is getting a small COLE increase every year. So I think what we should consider doing is reimbursing them for the amount that they're going to contribute, their 10.5%, that they're not getting a benefit out of. The only way we could change their contribution is to amend the plan again, and I don't think we want to go through that. So as an example, if you look at Chief Lang, his contribution is about $18,000 a year based on his current comp level, and he's going to hit the drop in about a year and a half. So he would put in about $27,000 out of his own pocket. That $27,000 really wouldn't fund very much, if any, additional benefit for him. So I think if we made him whole by giving him a bonus equal to what he's contributed that he's not getting a benefit out of, that would make him whole again. And I think his pension benefit is fine based on our new formulas. So
Gary,
that would be
I
my
have a question.
suggestion.
Okay. Sorry, and that's your suggestion. So this is where I have trouble with your analysis is if this were a defined contribution plan, I think you're absolutely right. You're paying into, you're not getting anything extra. But this is actually a defined benefits plan. And this can be something that are, God willing, our employees can live for another 60 years, right? Because it's infinite. So that's where I think that the math I do a little differently than you. So I think I caution what we're doing, and we did not. We inherited this formula and this process because it is in fact defined benefits and not contribution. So I'm a little concerned about that analysis. And then the other thing that I just would like to say is I personally, when we were going through the collective bargaining process, and, we all do this, and everyone and our employees are part of a collective bargaining unit, and there are many, many winners, but they're compromised with having a group collectively agree to a contract on both sides. But I have to tell you, I thought long and hard, and because this issue was raised in the beginning, when I made my decision trying to equalize and make sure that our employees were made whole and that they were not being penalized was really very a priority for me. And it's why, you know, I agreed to the changes of going from 95 for Chief Herring from $95,000 a year to 128, Chief Lang from 106 to 147, and Marco Osorio from 90 to 133,000. I really, really tried to address that inequity while also trying to follow what has been our policy of trying to not distinguish among employees and not have two tiers and not doing something different than for others, and trying to be consistent throughout. Now, I think where we could address this more effectively, and it's been brought up by different council members at different junctures, is our employees could opt out of the pension at this point and do a contract with a 401A. So that's another option. I'm talking about this because I'm working through it, but I have to tell you that for me, when I participated and we were negotiating the collective bargaining, I tried to address that issue and that disparity in what we came up with. So that's all I want to add. And yes, Frank.
Well, maybe an efficient way for me to advance this conversation is to pick up on your point about disparity. I don't think the chiefs that are affected by this kind of unique phenomenon.
This actually isn't that unique. This happens a lot in collective bargaining agreements.
Well, it's unique in our plan. And so on the subject of disparity, I kind of see it as Gary articulated it, in substantial part, because no one else in the plan is affected in the same way that these three guys are affected. And the effect is that they will be contributing for between some number of months and 2 years and not growing their benefit, because their salaries, when it comes time to compute their 80% of average final comp, will be over 80%. So they're not growing their benefit while they're contributing, and everybody else is. And as things stand now, I don't think they can opt out of contributing, because our plan requires members of the uniformed services to be active participants in the plan.
I think our chiefs can.
Our chiefs can.
Our chiefs definitely can, and we passed the in-service distribution. Our chief.
Not chiefs.
Are you sure about that?
Chief.
I thought our in-service distribution was broader than our chief.
No, it was not.
No?
It was our chiefs. It
It's
was
the police chief and the fire chief.
Yep.
Chief or chiefs?
Police
and
and fire,
but not Osorio and not Herring.
I thought it was broader than that.
No, I don't think so.
The chief of the fire department and the chief of the police department.
But Frank, the other issue is, and this is why we discussed and we had a philosophical discussion on how we felt it was equitable to do our compensation on this pension, and we've all mentioned that there's been a big increase in the benefits because of that hard dollar cap being so low. Mm-hmm. And we agreed, despite how financially difficult it would be in this village, to not do a hard dollar cap, so that we in effect weren't really capping benefits. We're capping the percentage that it can increase. It can only go to 80%, but if they continue to get salary increases, those will be built into that 80%.
Mm-hmm.
It is true, but as Gary said, it's true, but it's a fraction. It's not the same
Both
as
of these are
growing.
fractions. We're dealing with 6 months to a year and a half of contributions. We happen to have people that are, and it's a policy decision that we had the discussion during collective bargaining.
But you see well, I think that's true. It would be incorrect to say that it's not. My opinion is that this issue was kicked till later because at least as I saw it at the time, the importance and complication of dealing with the rank and file was such that nobody really wanted to complicate that work with what might have been considered to be extraneous work.
I mean, we even agreed to, I'm sorry, Allison, but we agreed to give an either or. So for those people that benefited better with 90% or 90,000, they could opt for that, or they could go to the 80%.
That is true.
And when we make these decisions, if we're not going to be able to follow them and be consistent, which is sometimes everybody's not going to get 100%. If we're going to set limits, we need to live by our limits. And I feel like when we look at this, we're just going another way around and not really abiding by the limits of what we set as a policy.
And I think that's fair. I just see it a little bit differently, but I don't dispute the sincerity or truth of what you just
Katie,
said.
I have to say that's what was compelling for me and why I made the decision based on what we all collectively, what our policy decisions were there.
So my way of looking at it, although I think you're correct in how you see it, is that we, or at least I, pushed this till later.
Well,
But
I think we,
you don't agree with that.
Just to be clear, I mean, you may still come out to the same place, but they're not in the union, right? Like, they're not part of the collective bargaining. They participate in the pension and they receive this benefit, but
the only ones that are not part of the union are the two heads.
Okay. And that's
they
sort
can
of
opt out.
That's
They're not the
who
ones
we're talking about.
I mean, they can opt out with our insert.
I'm not trying to sway you one way or
All
another,
three
but to
are
base an
outside.
argument on
Okay.
they were subject to being part of.
Well, but when you are doing collective bargaining and the pension benefits affect you, it is in fact collective bargaining. You can't negotiate as an individual, and that's a very tough spot, and that's why the opting out. Sometimes that's why we had that discussion as well.
But they weren't part of approving it, right? They weren't voting.
Can we put this in perspective?
Yes.
I mean, we went way out of our way to make things fair for everybody. Coming back and renegotiating this, I don't think I just don't know what to say. I mean, when you use the word a fraction, or we didn't fraction anything. We increased significantly the benefits to our police and fire.
No, the fraction is because of the COLA increase, which is true. But if you look at Pete's numbers, they're pretty sizable numbers.
They're huge numbers.
That are the spread between 80% and in one case it's 87%, in another case it's 86%, in another case it's 82%. They're not entitled to those incremental dollars, which are not fractions. They're pretty big dollars.
Well, they get big when you look at them over the projected lifespan of somebody, and then we bring it back. I mean, you can look at it in multiple ways. The other
or you
thing,
can see a $5 million impact, right?
The other thing that I would say,
right? I don't know if I agree with that, but
I actually, there's more than just pension benefits, and I looked at, we want equity across our public safety. And when I went back and looked at salaries of police versus fire in 2013 and 2014, when this collective bargaining occurred, there was a very little difference between them as far as the top positions. And at this point, our salaries, there's a much wider spread between our top fire and our top police. I don't know why. I wasn't around for those decisions. But that also impacts pension because it's a percentage of your salary. So now people that we are, looking at the equity across these different departments, we are looking to add benefits to people that are more highly compensated within our organization.
That's a good point.
And that
Brad,
is,
would
I
you
think,
like to?
a problem.
I think Gary wanted to speak.
Well,
let me just say,
wait.
let me
Gary,
say one more thing.
Yeah, Gary, and then Brett. I can't see you raising your hand.
This will be my final comment because I really don't want this to turn into a debate, and that's not what I intended. What I intended to do is to make the point that we were, when we first started talking about this executive package, looking at a fairly significant amount to give certain people an extra benefit that would bring them to where they could have been had we gone to a larger formula calculation. We went to that larger calculation, and now we're talking about a small number. And this whole thing to me turns on one thing. I'm not questioning that we gave a great benefit to all of our firefighters and our police officers, and we gave a really great benefit to the chiefs as well. But here's my only concern, and this is my point. I firmly believe that an individual plan participant's contribution is for one purpose and one purpose only, and that is to fund part of his retirement benefit. It's not to fund someone else's benefit. It's not to reduce the unfunded liability. It's only there to participate in funding their own retirement benefit. And to the extent someone is putting money into a plan and it's not funding their own benefit, it's funding something else, I just simply think it's wrong. We're not talking about a great deal of money. I think we've done a great job, but I just simply think it's wrong for someone to put money into a plan, which they have to do if they're in the plan, and not get a benefit out of it. And that's my only point.
Oh, thank you. Brett?
And Gary, I just want to make it clear that your recommendation was to just reimburse the difference directly back to them in a form of a bonus.
That's correct, because to do anything else would involve another amendment to the plan. And since we're talking about a relatively small amount of money, I don't think we should even think about going there.
Okay.
Katie?
Okay, a couple of thoughts. First of all, to your point that you don't get a benefit when you're putting the money in, I would say that there are two benefits. One is the health of the plan, and knowing that if you go past your projected age that you're going to live, that there will be money there for you. Secondly, the way our plan is structured is whatever money any employee puts in, they are guaranteed to get all of that money back, no matter what happens, or their dependents that they name can also get that money back. So I don't think it's entirely fair to say that you don't get anything. Do you get an increased amount of pension on a monthly level? No, you don't. So I understand that part of it, but pensions are very complicated. We spent many hours trying to figure out what was the fair thing to do, what was the right thing to do, what would be sustainable, hopefully, so that we don't have to constantly renegotiate this, because it also completely throws off the funding that we do on an annual basis. So I just feel that we took this all into consideration under the collective bargaining, and I think whenever we do something, it's a policy that we're trying to either administer across the board or we're not.
But they're outside the collective bargaining.
No.
Right? They're not part of the union.
We can give them a benefit, but the question is, if you're going to do that on one side, what are you going to do to the other? As far as what is our policy going to be moving forward? As soon as someone hits 80%, are we going to start adding extra money?
Why do we have a cap then?
And then why have a cap if we're putting it outside?
I mean, that to me, that's the whole point was to try to manage.
And we had a pretty thorough discussion on potentially doing 75%.
Yep.
And we ended up at 80 to try and bridge this gap to keep from having a problem.
And the amount of money in the budget would be the amount of difference that we would need to, if we went with Gary's idea and we were going to reimburse in a form of bonus, that amount that's budgeted, is that more than what the difference would be? Do we know exactly what that number is?
You can't know the number exactly because you're projecting how long someone lives, and then you're trying to bring.
We're only reimbursing the additional contribution that's not going in, that they wouldn't be getting out, right? So we should have a number on that.
It is. It's 10.5% of their salary.
Well, 10.5, but a portion of that, 80% of that, is going in, and then the rest of.
Two of the guys are all, none of it is recoverable, I think, by any of these three guys at this point. They're all over 80%. So if
not yet. I mean,
if the
one will have to work in order to get to the rule of 75. One has to work an extra 6 months. One, I think, is a year, and one is a year and a half. Am I correct?
But if you disagree with Gary's point that the theory of pension is to put in money for your own retirement, then this is, you won't be persuaded by this. But if you agree with that point.
I think it's a collective pot.
but it's not a union
And
issue.
I think it's a collective pot, and I think you also, it's defined benefits and not contribution, so I think that's,
So the difference there is it's a life sinecure. It's great.
Now we're repeating the same.
well, yes,
argument.
yes,
All right.
okay,
So this is a discussion.
yeah.
The takeaway from this discussion is we have a difference of opinion on some
Correct.
elements of this. And the question is whether this council or another council wants to bring it up as an action item and see where it goes.
Yeah.
But
And I think what's difficult about that is I think, we acted in good faith when we were doing our collective bargaining negotiations, and I thought we were all on the same policy page. And that's where I think it gets sticky for another council.
well, if something was going to happen, I think it would be suitable to happen in this council because we did all this work. So I suppose that's another way of saying if somebody wants to bring this up next time we're together, they'll do so for action. And it'll go up or it'll go down.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, I think we're
Move to
done.
adjourn.
Second.
Meeting is adjourned.
Can I say one thing?
I think we're done.
Can I
Thanks.
say one thing?
Meeting is adjourned, Frank.
Kelly Josephson retired, and I just meant to say something nice about all of her years
Yeah.
of service, but I forgot.
You're right. That's nice.